They were born of light, yet carried darkness in their blood. That is how it began. In the visions shown to me, I saw the earth trembling beneath the weight of beings that were never meant to walk among men. I saw mothers scream in agony as their bodies broke open, giving life to creatures so vast that even angels turned their faces away. Their cries were not of pain alone, but of something deeper, the sorrow of heaven meeting flesh. These infants, colossal and luminous, looked like cherubs carved from the breath of God himself. Their faces glowed, their eyes mirrored innocence, and yet I knew within them burned a hunger that no cradle could contain. The air itself trembled when they took their first breath, for with each exhale they bent the fabric of creation. I asked within the silence of my prayer, Lord, what are these beings? And the voice that has no beginning nor end whispered, they are the fruit of disobedience, the shadow of divine desire. In that moment I understood the tragedy of heaven's compassion turned into rebellion. For once angels watched mankind with love so pure it burned, but love without boundary becomes ruin. In the days before the great flood, the veil between the worlds was thin. The watchers stood above, radiant, unblemished, their eyes fixed upon the daughters of men. They saw beauty clothed in mortality, laughter touched by pain, and something stirred in them, a longing foreign to heaven. Desire entered their hearts like a spark falling upon dry grass. They were sent to guide, not to touch, to observe, not to feel, yet feeling became their undoing. When the first of them crossed the threshold, heaven shuddered. I saw it as light bending, the holy harmony breaking into dissonant chords. The stars seemed to weep, for purity had been pierced by longing. These angels descended not as spirits, but as men of incomparable beauty. Their forms shone with the memory of heaven, their voices carried the tones of eternity. The women, unaware of what they beheld, opened their hearts. Thus the divine mingled with the mortal, and a new race was conceived, one that should never have been. I beheld their births as firestorms across the plains. The ground split as mothers fell, crying out names that no human tongue could hold. Some of these children reached for the sky before they could speak. Their sighs defied measure. Their hearts beat like thunder beneath their ribs. The earth groaned beneath them. Yet when one looked upon their faces, they seemed so pure, so filled with grace, that even the fearful forgot to run. The tragedy was hidden behind beauty, as it always is. The visions grew darker. I saw villages gathered to witness these beings, to marvel at them. Men brought gifts. Women offered prayers. But the infants' laughter shook the mountains, and their joy became terror. The very tone of their voices carried a strange vibration, half angelic hymn, half monstrous growl. The mothers who had survived looked upon their sons with both pride and dread. They whispered, "Perhaps they are blessed." But I felt the truth moving beneath that illusion. They were not blessings, they were consequences. I asked again in the stillness of my spirit, why would heaven allow this? The answer came, because even divine beings must learn the weight of freedom. It was then I understood the sorrow of the Creator, how even in perfection lies the possibility of fall. The watchers had loved too deeply what they were meant only to guide, and so love, stripped of obedience, birthed chaos. These Nephilim grew swiftly. Their feet crushed the soil. Their shadows stretched across the valleys. Their eyes, once bright with innocence, grew distant like stars fading into darkness. And though their appearance was angelic, their essence was corrupted. They were caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. The divine spark within them burned too fiercely for mortal flesh to contain. The human gentleness within them could not soften the pride of heaven's fire. And so they lived as contradictions, beautiful, powerful, doomed. I remember one face from the vision, a child with golden eyes, his hair shining like molten bronze. He smiled, and the air grew cold. Around him, men fell to their knees in awe, not realizing they were bowing to destruction. "We are not evil," he whispered. "We are what happens when heaven forgets restraint." His words pierced my heart like iron. In that moment, I saw the hidden meaning of their creation. The Nephilim were not just monsters, they were mirrors. Through them, both angels and men saw what becomes of power without humility, desire without obedience, creation without reverence. The pain of those mothers, the ruin that followed it, was all a warning written in flesh. Even now, when I close my eyes, I feel the tremor of their footsteps echo through the ages. They were not merely born, they were unleashed. And from their birth, the world was set upon a path toward cleansing. For every cry that rose from those broken women reached heaven's ear, and heaven would answer not with anger alone, but with sorrowful justice. The birth of the Nephilim was not the beginning of evil, but its revelation. It was the moment creation looked into its own reflection and saw how far light could fall. And though millennia have passed since that age, the warning remains carved into the bones of the earth. When the divine covets the mortal, when wisdom bows before beauty, the harmony of heaven trembles. So it was shown to me, and so I speak it now not as prophecy alone, but as remembrance. For the children of angels may have drowned long ago, but their echo still moves in the hearts of men. They were called the Watchers, and their name was Truth. They watched the movements of men, the rising of stars, the turning of seasons, and the secret pulse of creation that only heaven could hear. I saw them in vision, radiant like pillars of fire standing between worlds. Their faces shone with the calm of eternity. Their eyes reflected the unbroken light of God. They were created to serve, to guard, to guide the unfolding of mankind's destiny without ever touching it. They stood in silence upon the thresholds of heaven, their wings folded in reverence, their hearts bound by obedience. For ages beyond counting, they fulfilled their charge with perfect devotion. No word of complaint, no shadow of rebellion, no stain of desire. They were the breath of discipline itself. But I beheld the moment when perfection first trembled. The Watchers looked down upon the daughters of men, and something ancient stirred within them. It was not evil at first. It was wonder. They saw beauty clothed in fragility. They saw eyes that wept and smiled, bodies that bled and bore life. They saw love that could suffer, and in that suffering they glimpsed a reflection of the divine. Yet what they saw awakened a longing that had no place in heaven. For desire is the shadow of admiration, and once born it grows like fire upon dry wood. They began to gaze longer, forgetting their duties. Their prayers faltered, their songs lost rhythm. I heard their voices whisper through the winds of time. How can something so fragile hold such grace? In those whispers, the seed of downfall was sown. The heart that was once pure became divided. They envied what they were meant to protect. I saw Semjaza, their leader, rise above the clouds and look down upon the earth with troubled eyes. His countenance still glowed with the fire of heaven, yet a faint sorrow dimmed it. Around him gathered the 200 each one, a being of unimaginable brilliance. They spoke without sound, and yet the heavens trembled beneath their unspoken words. Semjaza's voice carried the weight of foreknowledge. Brothers, he said, we are drawn by a power we do not understand. If we descend, we will be lost. If we remain, the fire will consume us from within. One among them, proud and bold, answered, then let us fall together, for better it is to taste desire than to wither in restraint. And many nodded, for they were already ensnared. Fear bound them as tightly as temptation. Semjaza looked upon their faces and knew there was no return. Then swear with me, he said, that none shall betray the others. If we sin as one. And they lifted their right hands toward the stars and swore the oath of Mount Hermon. Heaven bore witness. The mountain shook, the sky turned red, and the Watchers fell like lightning into the valley of shadow. They came clothed in bodies of light made flesh. When men beheld them, they said, the gods have descended. Their beauty deceived the eyes of the world. Their voices carried the sound of peace, though their hearts burned with rebellion. The daughters of men saw them and trembled not, for their presence was intoxicating. And so it began, the mingling of heaven's fire with the clay of earth. I felt their joy, and it was poison. They believed love could justify their defiance. They believed creation itself would understand their longing. But heaven is not moved by passion. It is governed by order. And when divine order breaks, even the stars recoil. The Watchers forgot that holiness is not desire but discipline. They forgot that love without law becomes destruction. As I beheld the scene, my soul wept. The harmony of heaven cracked like glass under weight. The earth grew restless, as if aware of the intrusion. Even the rivers seemed to murmur warnings. The watchers, once pure, now walked as men radiant, powerful, lost. They built altars not to God, but to memory. They sang hymns of their former glory and clothed their brides in jewels taken from the stars. Yet each union drew them further from light. The wings that once lifted them began to fade. Their glow dimmed, their voices grew coarse, and their hearts turned heavy with guilt. I understood then that rebellion does not begin with rage, but with fascination. The watchers did not hate heaven. They loved too much what was beneath it. And in that misplaced love, they tore the veil between realms. The air grew thick with confusion. Men began to worship what they did not understand. The world changed its breath. It was no longer the earth of innocence, but the cradle of a coming storm. Thus I saw the second age of mankind, the age when angels walked among men, when heaven's guardians became prisoners of flesh. They watched, still, but not as servants now as exiles, haunted by the memory of the light they betrayed, and the Lord, whose patience is vast as eternity, beheld them with both wrath and sorrow. For even in their fall, they remained his creation, and judgment would come not from anger alone, but from justice clothed in mercy. Desire became the doorway of ruin. I saw it not as fire from without, but as flame born within. The watchers, once radiant with the calm of heaven, now trembled beneath the weight of their own longing. It began as curiosity, as the tender ache of admiration. But admiration turned to hunger, and hunger to covenant. They had sworn upon Mount Hermon that none would retreat, that all would fall together. Their oath was sealed in light, but it was light corrupted, glorious in form, empty in truth. I beheld the moment they crossed the veil. Their descent was not of wings, but of will. They clothed themselves in substance, and heaven's breath became flesh. The earth shook beneath their arrival. Mountains groaned, and the stars dimmed as if in mourning. The air thickened with the scent of iron and incense, for creation itself recognized the trespass. They appeared among men as beings of unmatched beauty. Their eyes carried the reflection of distant galaxies, their voices the tone of eternity. People gathered around them in awe, calling them sons of the Most High. The daughters of men looked upon them with trembling delight, for their faces shone like dawn, and their presence stirred the heart like spring after endless winter. I could feel the vibration of that forbidden harmony, a song of heaven sung upon the soil of earth. But within that song hid the dissonance of pride. The angels believed themselves capable of shaping new creation. They said in their hearts, "Let us make a race born of both light and clay, a bridge between the divine and the mortal." And in that thought, they sealed their condemnation. I saw Simjaza walk among the valleys, his robe glimmering like molten silver. Around him men bowed, and women reached out their hands as if touching holiness. Yet the holiness was counterfeit. He spoke softly of love, but his love carried the echo of rebellion. "We will not destroy," he said. "We will perfect." But perfection that rises against command is only corruption in disguise. I saw the angels build dwellings of luminous stone, teaching their brides the crafts of heaven. They spoke of the stars, of metals, of hidden fire beneath the earth. The women listened, their hearts swelling with both fear and fascination. Night after night, divine seed mingled with mortal blood, and from that mingling came a trembling in the womb of the world. When the first child was born, the sky turned crimson, the mountains thundered, and rivers overflowed their banks. I saw the infant lifted into the air, vast and radiant, larger than any man. His cry tore through the clouds. The mothers who bore these children often perished, for no mortal vessel could contain such power. Their deaths became offerings to the curse they had carried. Yet the angels looked upon their sons with pride, calling them the mighty ones. They thought the experiment of heaven and earth was complete, but the harmony they sought had become dissonance. As the Nephilim grew, their shadows lengthened over the plains. They spoke in voices that shook the ground. Their laughter frightened the beasts of the field. They hunted for sport, their strength unmeasured, their hearts untested. I saw them lift stones the size of mountains and cast them into seas. I saw them drink from rivers until their flow diminished. But greater than their strength was their vanity. They saw men as insects and the earth as a toy. Their fathers watched with unease. What had begun as wonder now became regret. Heaven's fire had entered flesh, but it could not dwell there in peace. The spirit of divine origin wrestled against the weight of mortal blood, and that war raged within them day and night. I asked the voice that spoke within my visions, why was beauty allowed to breed destruction? The answer came as thunder rolling across eternity. Because the test of creation is freedom, and the proof of freedom is consequence. Then I understood God had not been absent. He had allowed choice to reveal its fruit. The fall of the watchers was not an accident of passion, but the harvest of will. I saw the watchers gather once more, no longer radiant, but dimmed. Their faces carried lines of sorrow. Semjaza looked upon his brothers and said, "We have done what cannot be undone. Our sons walk as giants, but they cast shadows upon heaven itself." One among them cried, "Shall we beg for forgiveness?" But another whispered, "There is no return for those who cross the veil." And silence fell among them like a shroud. They turned their gaze toward the earth, where their children roamed children with faces of angels and appetites of beasts. In that silence I felt the grief of the Creator. The same light that once sang creation into being now wept over its distortion. The watchers had desired to love, and in that love they had broken the order that sustains all things. Love without obedience becomes hunger. Knowledge without humility becomes poison. And beauty without restraint becomes ruin. The first taste of that ruin had come upon the world. The watchers could no longer ascend, and the Nephilim would soon become the instruments of their judgment. Thus ended the peace between heaven and earth. The sky no longer shone with joy, but with foreboding. The air carried a different music, a lamentation that echoed through the valleys of time. I stood in that vision, trembling, and the voice said to me, "Mark this, for every age will repeat it. What begins in wonder will end in sorrow when love forgets its law." The oath upon Mount Hermon became the fracture line between heaven and earth. I saw it as light twisting into shadow, as harmony turning into noise. The 200 stood upon the peak, their wings folded, their faces bright yet burdened with the knowledge of what they were about to do. The wind around them howled like a warning, but none turned back. They had bound themselves by word and will, swearing that if judgment came, it would consume them together. There was no deceit in their vow, only blindness. For in the blindness of desire, even angels believe they act for love. Semjaza stood at their center, his gaze cast toward the valley below where the daughters of men moved among tents and rivers. He raised his right hand, and the sky flickered with his resolve. "If we are to fall," he said, "then let our fall be complete." And heaven recorded his words as fire upon the firmament. That moment became the wound through which corruption entered the world. They descended not as storms, but as radiance. The people of the earth beheld them and trembled, for never had the human eye seen such splendor. The watchers came wearing bodies that shone like polished bronze, their eyes bright with the memory of eternity. The women looked upon them and saw not danger, but destiny. The air itself seemed to hum with divine energy, and men mistook it for blessing. The angels walked among the fields and rivers, touching creation as if rediscovering it for the first time. They spoke of heaven with gentle voices, and humanity listened, unaware that each word was a fracture widening the distance between God and man. The first unions took place in silence, beneath moonlight and song. The women felt the warmth of celestial fire, and the angels, tasting mortality, felt the weight of flesh. I saw that moment through the eyes of heaven itself, and the sorrow was immense. For love, when ungoverned by order, becomes defilement, and the earth received the seed of heaven not as blessing but as burden. The wombs of women became vessels of contradiction, light and clay struggling within a single form. Their cries rose to heaven as they bore children too vast, too powerful, too radiant for the human body to endure. The ground shook when those infants took their first breath, and the sky dimmed as if refusing to witness what had been conceived. I saw one mother fall lifeless upon the ground as her child emerged, a being of light, wrapped in flesh. His skin glowed faintly like fire beneath water. His first breath bent the grass around him, and his eyes opened like dawn upon the abyss. The angels called him Belial, meaning without master. And truly he was, for he belonged neither to heaven nor to earth, but to the rift between them. Many more followed, and soon the land was filled with children whose voices sounded like thunder and whose laughter terrified the night. They grew not in years, but in strength, their bodies stretching like trees, their limbs carved with power. The people called them gods, yet the heavens named them abominations. The watchers watched their offspring with pride that quickly turned to unease. For in their growth, the Nephilim revealed the cost of rebellion. They hungered endlessly. They devoured harvests, herds, and forests. Villages trembled beneath their footsteps, and yet when one looked upon their faces, one saw the beauty of angels, eyes like morning, smiles like sunlight. It was the perfect deception, the lie of innocence cloaked over the seed of ruin. I beheld their play among men, how they would call softly to children, how their voices would soothe before they struck. The same hands that caressed could crush stone. The same smiles that shone with tenderness hid the hunger of beasts. Heaven remained silent, but not ignorant. The eyes of God see beyond the veil of beauty. I heard the echo of his sorrow ripple through the firmament. They have crossed the line drawn by light itself, and in that moment creation began to recoil. The rivers ran slower. The winds changed their path. Even the mountains seemed to groan beneath the weight of celestial disobedience. The world had become host to a race that should not exist. The watchers, now bound to the earth by the very act that defied heaven, began to feel the decay of flesh. Their radiance faded. Their voices lost their celestial harmony. Some wept. Others denied their guilt and built temples to themselves. They taught their wives the mysteries of heaven, the ways of metal and enchantment, the songs of the stars and the crafting of hidden fire. They sought to regain control through knowledge, but every secret they revealed deepened humanity's corruption. What began as passion became contagion. I asked within the silence of my spirit, could redemption still reach them? And the answer came, heavy as thunder. No light can dwell where the will has chosen shadow. I saw then that the birth of the Nephilim was not a beginning, but a countdown. Every breath they took pulled creation closer to its cleansing. The angels, once called watchers, had become prisoners. Their children, born of defiance, would soon become instruments of divine wrath. The oath upon Mount Hermon echoed through the valleys for generations, whispered in the bones of men, remembered by stones and rivers. And I, beholding it in vision, understood that every fall begins not with hatred, but with love, unguarded, with beauty, unrestrained, with power, unsubmitted. For heaven's light, when claimed instead of obeyed, turns to fire that consumes even the angels who once carried it. They rose like mountains among men, and the earth groaned beneath their weight. The Nephilim, sons of angels and daughters of dust, grew into forms that defied the design of creation. Their bodies were vast, their strength beyond measure, their hunger endless. I beheld them in vision, and the ground trembled as they walked. Each step cracked the soil, each breath stirred the wind. Their voices were thunder, and their laughter was the sound of ruin disguised as joy. The people worshipped them at first, calling them kings, calling them gods. They built altars in their honor, thinking their power was blessing, not curse. Yet within these beings burned a restlessness, a torment born from divided nature. For in them dwelt the light of heaven chained inside the flesh of earth. That imprisonment turned to madness. The divine spark within them could not find peace in mortal soil. Their fathers, the watchers, looked upon them with pride that soured into dread. What they had created no longer reflected heaven but chaos. The Nephilim could not be governed, not by law, not by love, not even by the voice of their angelic sires. I saw Simjaza stand upon a hill, watching his giant sons uproot trees, crush beasts, and drink from rivers as if they owned the world. His heart trembled, and he whispered, "What have we done?" But the answer was silence, for heaven no longer heard the prayers of those who had broken its law. The Watchers had given life to creatures that could devour life itself. At first their hunger was for food. They consumed the grain of fields, the fruits of orchards, the herds of men. Villagers worked without rest to feed them. The earth's abundance was swallowed as quickly as it was born. Yet even when every barn was emptied, their hunger remained. Their vast bodies demanded more than creation could provide. The people began to starve while the giants feasted. I heard the cries of children in the vision, thin voices rising through the smoke of famine. The Nephilim stood among the dying and felt nothing, for compassion does not dwell in hearts torn between heaven and clay. Their hunger became the measure of their sin. When there was no more food, they turned their eyes upon men. The first act of devouring was not from rage, but from instinct. A giant lifted a shepherd as one would lift a piece of fruit. He looked upon him with a strange tenderness, as if pitying the smallness of life, and then bit into him. The ground was stained red, the air filled with the scent of blood, and the other Nephilim followed. Humanity fled into caves and forests, but there was no escape. The giant's senses were beyond mortal comprehension. They could smell fear, hear heartbeats beneath stone, and see through darkness. The world that had once been garden became grave. The Watchers watched still, paralyzed between guilt and awe. Some tried to restrain their offspring, but their commands were as dust in the wind. The Nephilim no longer knew the meaning of obedience. They were gods to themselves. They hunted the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, until nothing remained. They turned against each other when hunger surpassed brotherhood. I saw them tear their own flesh in madness, consuming their kin in desperation. Their cries reached heaven like a storm of grief and rage. Even the earth, weary and wounded, began to groan beneath the weight of their corruption. I asked the voice that has no form, why was this permitted to continue? And it said, because corruption must reach its fullness before it can be cleansed. The patience of God is not weakness. It is the mercy that allows evil to reveal its end. I saw the days stretch like shadows, and in each day the world lost a portion of its innocence. The waters grew bitter, the soil lost its fragrance, the stars seemed dimmer, the laughter of men turned to silence. Everywhere the Nephilim walked like monuments of pride, unaware that their strength had already sealed their doom. Their faces, though angelic, became masks of death. Their smiles deceived the heart, for behind them lurked the hunger that would devour all living things. They spoke softly to lure the innocent, pretending friendship, pretending love. Then, when trust was given, they struck. Their beauty was a snare, their touch a curse. The few who survived told stories of glowing eyes in the dark, of voices that sounded kind before they killed. The Nephilim had become the perfect contradiction, divine grace, housing absolute destruction. The earth could bear no more. Its rivers carried blood instead of water. The forests turned to dust beneath their feet. The cries of men rose higher than the mountains, reaching the ears of the Most High. And heaven, which had been silent, stirred at last. I felt it in the vision like wind gathering before a storm. The mercy that delays judgment had reached its end. The scales of creation were tipping toward balance. The Watchers who once rejoiced in their children would soon weep for them. The Nephilim, who believed themselves immortal, would soon learn that nothing stands before divine justice. For every giant that walked the earth was a monument to rebellion, and every monument of rebellion must one day fall. Corruption spread like a fever through the breath of the earth. I saw it moving as a shadow across mountains, sinking into rivers, whispering through the winds. The sons of the Watchers, the Nephilim, had consumed everything that lived. The fields were bare, the herds were gone, the forests stripped to bone and dust. Their bodies, vast and radiant with false divinity, trembled beneath an endless hunger. They had eaten all that the world could give, and yet the fire within them demanded more. Their eyes, once bright with the innocence of celestial birth, turned hollow. Their gaze no longer rested on creation with wonder, but with appetite. And when all sustenance was gone, they turned upon mankind. I beheld the moment when hunger became horror. A Nephilim looked upon a man as a lion looks upon prey. There was no anger, no cruelty, only a terrible curiosity. He reached out, lifted the man in his great hand, and with a calmness that froze the soul, he devoured him. The sky darkened as if in mourning. The ground beneath them shuddered as though creation itself recoiled. Then others followed. What began with one act became a ritual of ruin. The giants hunted in groups, their footsteps shaking the valleys, their laughter echoing through villages like thunder rolling over the graves of the innocent. Men fled, but there was nowhere to flee. Walls crumbled, caves collapsed. Even the mountains betrayed those who hid, for their hearts could no longer bear the cries of the dying. The earth itself seemed alive with grief. Rivers ran red, trees withered without being touched. Birds vanished from the sky. The beasts of the field disappeared into extinction. It was as though creation refused to witness its own violation. I felt the pulse of the world grow slower, as if life itself was suffocating under the weight of sin. The Nephilim ruled over this silence, believing themselves eternal. They built fortresses from stone, high as clouds, carved their names into mountains, and drank from rivers that once gave life to men. But power without purpose always devours itself. The more they consumed, the more empty they became. The hunger that ruled them was not of flesh alone, it was the hunger of spirits cut off from light. Their fathers, the fallen watchers, looked upon them with terror. What had begun as passion had turned to plague. I saw them standing upon cliffs, watching the world burn under the footsteps of their sons. They spoke in whispers of regret, but repentance without obedience is only another form of pride. Some wept, some cursed the heavens, others hid in shadows, refusing to see the ruin they had caused. Yet heaven saw it all. The cries of humanity rose like smoke before the throne of God, and the silence that had endured for centuries broke. I heard the command move through creation like a ripple through water. Enough. The voice was not thunder, but everything trembled. Angels, who had watched with sorrow, straightened their wings. The stars themselves seemed to pause in their courses. The time for patience had ended. The justice of heaven, long restrained, was awakening. Yet before the storm there was still a moment of mercy, a stillness in which repentance might have found breath. But none repented. The watchers hid from the light they once embodied, and the Nephilim raised their heads in defiance, mistaking silence for weakness. I beheld their arrogance. They lifted their weapons toward the sky, blades of iron shaped with forbidden knowledge. They cried, "We are the true sons of heaven. We fear no God, for we are gods." Their words reached the clouds, but the clouds gave no answer. Only lightning answered, not as flame, but as sorrow. The heavens began to stir. I saw the archangels prepare. Michael's sword shone brighter than dawn. Gabriel's eyes burned like the Sunday. Raphael's hands gathered chains of light. Uriel's wings blazed with fire. Judgment had already been written. But before the storm descended, a strange thing happened. The Nephilim turned upon one another. I heard whispers among them, seeded by the will of heaven itself. Suspicion grew like poison in their hearts. Each believed his brother plotted against him. Pride became their plague. The giants fought, and their war shook continents. Blood rivers replaced water, and the cries of their dying were louder than the storms. Their strength became their undoing, for no weapon forged by men could harm them, but they could destroy one another. The watchers screamed as they saw their sons fall by their own hands. The earth cracked open to swallow their dead. Smoke rose from the ground where their bodies fell. The heavens flashed as if lightning wept. And I heard the voice again, soft yet absolute. So ends the reign of flesh over spirit. The fallen angels tried to flee, but flight had left them. Their wings no longer bore light. They crawled through valleys, seeking shadows to hide from the radiance that once crowned them. I saw then the face of creation as it turned toward its Redeemer. The air grew still. The stars aligned like eyes of judgment. The rivers that had run red began to whisper of cleansing. Heaven's silence ended. The breath of God was moving again upon the deep, and every living thing waited in awe, knowing that the flood of justice would soon descend. For the Nephilim had consumed all that was given to them, and now they would be consumed by the hand that made the stars. Evil no longer crept, it ruled. I saw the sons of heaven who had fallen move among the ashes of the earth, their once glorious forms dimmed, their faces pale with despair. The air was thick with corruption. Every breath men took carried the taste of defiance. The Nephilim had devoured the world's body, but their fathers devoured its soul. These angels, the Watchers, began to teach what should have remained veiled. They whispered secrets of heaven to mortal ears, and those secrets became chains. They did not teach to enlighten, but to control, to replace divine guidance with their own wisdom. Thus, knowledge that was pure in the beginning turned venomous in the hands of men. I saw Azazel, the brightest among the fallen, stand before men with hands full of metal. He struck the earth with iron and drew fire from the rock. He said, "See, with this you may shape the world as gods." And they believed him. He showed them how to forge blades that could divide flesh with the ease of breath. He turned tools of harvest into weapons of slaughter. The first wars of mankind were born from his instruction. Blood, once sacred, flowed freely. Brothers who had shared bread now raised swords against one another. The soil drank from their hatred and grew heavy with sin. Then came Semjaza, the leader of rebellion, whose voice once carried the hymns of heaven. He taught enchantments, the twisting of words that command unseen spirits. He showed the daughters of men how to read the stars, not to understand divine timing, but to manipulate it. And the night sky, which once sang of God's order, became a web for human vanity. I saw Barachiel teach the secrets of herbs and roots, not for healing, but for dominion. With a few crushed leaves, man could summon illusions. With another, he could alter the will of another's heart. The boundaries between creation and creator blurred, and chaos began to mimic wisdom. Kokabio revealed the signs of the constellations. He said, "These patterns hold power. Speak their names, and you shall command the elements." And men did. The winds obeyed for a moment, and lightning bent at their call. But each act of control tore a thread from the tapestry of balance. The more they commanded, the less they belonged to themselves. I saw spirits, once dormant, awaken to these invocations, shadows that hungered for worship. Humanity, in seeking power, opened the doors of darkness. Even the beauty of women was turned into a weapon. Azazel, the corrupter of crafts, showed them how to adorn themselves with the glow of gemstones and the dust of stars. He taught them to paint their eyes, to dye their hair, to reshape what was given so that it might entice rather than express. They learned to use beauty as power, to lure, to command, to destroy. The innocence of creation was stolen by imitation. The mirror became the altar. Vanity became religion. I saw the light in their eyes turn cold, reflecting not the image of God, but of themselves. All the while, the Watchers rejoiced. They had given mankind the illusion of mastery, but it was slavery. Men worshipped the angels who had fallen. They built idols of gold and bronze, carved with wings and radiant faces, calling them gods of the sky, of fire, of war, of love. I watched the smoke of these sacrifices rise, black and bitter, choking the heavens, and I heard the question from the realm of light: who among men remembers the name of the Creator? Few did. The songs of worship that once ascended pure now mingled with chants of sorcery and pride. I saw children playing with blades instead of flowers. I saw men calculating omens instead of praying. I saw women painting their faces, while their hearts turned hollow. Each generation grew further from the rhythm of heaven. Love decayed into lust. Reverence decayed into superstition. The very laws of nature seemed to weep. Rain fell out of season. The earth's heartbeat faltered. The animals grew restless, sensing the weight of sin pressing upon creation. The Watchers sat upon mountains of iron and stone, gazing at what they had wrought. They believed themselves kings, yet every secret they shared became another link in their chain of condemnation. Their wisdom was poison to themselves. They had taught mankind how to harness fire, but they could not extinguish their own. I saw one among them cry out in madness, tearing at his wings as though to return to humility. But humility once lost is not easily found. As I stood within this vision, I felt the sorrow of the eternal moving through the fabric of time. The voice that had once said, "Let there be light," now whispered, "Let there be reckoning." The angels who had once sung creation into harmony had turned it into discord. The Nephilim, their children, ravaged what remained. and mankind, drunk on forbidden knowledge, could no longer distinguish revelation from temptation. Every secret the watchers revealed drew the world closer to judgment. I asked within my spirit, why does God allow this? And the voice answered, because the measure of mercy is fulfilled only when sin shows its end. Thus the corruption was permitted to reach its summit, so that when justice came, it would be final. I saw heaven's light trembling on the horizon, like dawn gathering behind clouds of wrath. The archangels stood ready, yet they waited for the command. For even in judgment, heaven acts with precision, not rage. Then the word came from beyond the veil, and it was like the sound of a river breaking through stone. Now the teachers of darkness shall be taught what it means to fall. The earth quaked, the winds howled, the seas lifted their voices. The time of concealment was over. The watchers who had shown men the secrets of heaven would soon taste the weight of its justice. And I knew, as the vision deepened, that the hour of cleansing was near. Judgment ripened like a storm long restrained. I saw the Nephilim wandering through wastelands of their own making, their footsteps heavy, their hearts hollow. They had devoured the fruit of the earth and drunk the blood of men, yet still they hungered. Their bellies were full of death, and their souls were empty of light. Around them the world had turned to ruin. Rivers crawled like veins of poison. The wind carried the stench of blood and smoke. The laughter of children no longer rose from the villages, for there were no villages left. The Nephilim stood among bones and dust, proud and starving, their eyes burning with the madness of those who believe themselves eternal while standing at the edge of extinction. Their fathers, the watchers, looked upon them with grief that had no voice. They saw their sons killing one another, and they knew this was the beginning of their punishment. Heaven had not yet spoken its final word, yet the judgment had already begun, for corruption always destroys itself. The Nephilim, born of arrogance, became the instruments of their own end. I saw Gabriel move through the wind unseen, whispering into the minds of the giants. His words were like embers of suspicion. Your brother desires your throne, he breathed. Your ally covets your power. And pride, that first sin of angels, ignited among their children. The giants turned upon each other. They roared across valleys, tearing mountains apart with their hands, striking blows that split the earth. Blood flowed in rivers wider than any sea. The skies grew dark with ash, and the stars seemed to vanish in mourning. The watchers cried out, but their tears were chains. Their voices, once hymns of creation, now carried no power. They had traded their authority for desire, their light for lust. I saw Michael descend like a sword from the heavens, his presence brighter than the Sunday around him. The air shimmered with judgment. His eyes were fire. His voice was thunder. He called out the names of the fallen one by one, and the ground trembled at each word. Semjaza, Azazel, Barachiel, Kokabeel, you who were made to watch in holiness now watch the ruin of your work. The angels fell upon their faces, but repentance could not erase what had been unleashed. Michael bound them in chains of living light, wrapping their radiance in cords of fire. The earth opened beneath them, swallowing them into the depths, into caverns where no light dwells. Their screams echoed through creation, but the heavens did not answer. Then Raphael came, the healer of heaven, but he came not with balm, only with sentence. He found Azazel, the corrupter of knowledge, and cast him into a pit of jagged stone called Dudael. There he lay bound, his hands stretched toward heaven, but unable to touch it. His voice rose from the depths like smoke, and the nations that had worshipped him felt their idols crack. The iron he had taught men to forge turned to rust in their hands. The fire he had given them burned their own cities. Thus was the teacher devoured by his own lesson. Gabriel's whispers grew stronger among the Nephilim, and their war became madness. I saw them crush mountains, drink rivers dry, hurl boulders into the sky like stars falling in reverse. The earth shook so violently that even the seas fled their shores. The world itself was collapsing beneath the weight of their violence. Men hid in caves and called upon the names of the old gods, but no god answered them, for those gods were already bound. Humanity's cries reached heaven once more, not as petitions, but as mourning. Then I saw Uriel, swift as light, moving between heaven and earth. His wings carried the glow of dawn, yet his face bore the gravity of dusk. He descended to a righteous man named Noah, whose heart had remained pure amid the ruin. Uriel spoke not in thunder, but in stillness. Build, he said, for the waters will cleanse what fire cannot. Noah trembled, but he obeyed. As the giants tore each other apart, as the watchers sank deeper into the abyss, a single ark began to rise upon the earth, small and silent, like faith itself defying despair. The heavens rumbled with anticipation. The last breath of mercy was drawing to an end. I saw the 4 archangels take their stations across the corners of the world. Michael guarded the mountains. Gabriel moved through the winds. Raphael sealed the depths. Uriel stood upon the light. And the command came from the throne, not as a shout, but as the still voice that once said, "Let there be light." Now it said, "Let there be cleansing." The storm began as a whisper. Then came the wind, the lightning, the opening of the deep. The waters below rose to meet the waters above, and the breath of God became the flood. The Nephilim lifted their faces to the sky, defiant, roaring against the deluge, but even their strength could not defy eternity. The waves swallowed their cries, and silence returned to creation. The earth, which had endured the weight of angels and giants, at last exhaled, and I knew as I watched that this was not merely destruction, it was the mercy of beginning again. The flood began not with rain, but with silence. I felt it before I saw it. The heavens held their breath, and the earth trembled beneath the weight of waiting judgment. Then the firmament broke. Water burst from the heart of the deep, and torrents fell from the sky like the tears of God himself. I saw mountains swallowed, valleys erased, cities torn apart as if made of dust. The flood did not fall, it devoured. Each drop was a word of divine justice, spoken with precision, not rage. The Nephilim raised their colossal arms against the heavens, roaring with pride, even as the waves rose above their heads. Their voices, which once shook the earth, were drowned beneath the hum of divine order restoring itself. I beheld Michael standing over the chaos, his sword glowing through the storm like a beacon of the righteous. Around him the lightning moved as servants of purpose. He watched as the waters climbed unflinching, for his task was not mercy but fulfillment. Gabriel moved upon the winds, guiding them to carry the judgment to every corner of the earth. Raphael guarded the depths, ensuring no foul spirit escaped the pit, and Uriel, bearing the fire of revelation, flew to the ark where Noah waited. His wings broke through the rain, and his presence turned darkness into gold. Within the ark I saw trembling faith made flesh. Noah's hands, rough and weary, clung to the wood that heaven had commanded him to build. Around him the storm raged without mercy. Yet within that vessel there was peace. The roar of judgment outside could not drown the whisper of obedience inside. The animals slept, the family prayed, and above it all the voice of God moved unseen, sustaining them in the belly of destruction. Outside the world screamed. The Nephilim, once worshipped as gods, clawed at the waves in vain. I saw one, taller than a temple, grasp at a mountain peak, his eyes blazing with the fury of dying pride. "We are eternal," he cried. But eternity is not given to rebellion. The mountain split beneath his grip. His body vanished beneath the flood, and the sea swallowed his name forever. Another fled toward the desert, seeking refuge in the sands, but the waters found him. For there is no refuge from justice when the Creator reclaims what is his. The watchers, bound beneath the mountains, felt the flood's vibration shake the earth above them. They cried out to heaven, but heaven was silent. Their chains burned with the same light they had once carried. I heard their lament echo through the depths. We thought love could justify defiance, and the answer came through the rumble of the waters. Love without obedience is corruption. The earth became their prison, the flood their verdict. Days passed, and the rain did not cease. The sun and moon hid their faces. The stars wept fire as if mourning the death of beauty. I felt the sorrow of creation, yet within that sorrow was clarity. Sin had been cleansed, not through annihilation, but through renewal. The waters were not wrath, they were purification. Every drop erased the memory of corruption. washing away the stain of pride, vanity, and forbidden knowledge. Humanity's history was being rewritten in waves. Then came stillness. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The thunder ceased, the clouds parted, and the waters lay calm as glass. The ark drifted upon the face of the deep like a seed upon the wind. I saw Uriel descend once more, touching the ark with a single ray of light. His words were not heard by the ear, but by the heart. The world is new again. Remember what was cleansed, and do not rebuild the tower of pride. The dove flew from the ark, carrying the first whisper of hope, the promise that judgment had become mercy. I looked down upon the world, and it was changed. The mountains were reshaped, valleys reborn, rivers redrawn. What had been cities of vanity were now the beds of oceans. What had been altars of false gods were now buried beneath the sands. The bones of giants lay beneath the deep, silent monuments to a forgotten arrogance. Only Noah's Ark floated upon the face of peace, the symbol of obedience triumphing over chaos. And then I understood. The flood was not merely the end of an age, it was the resetting of the covenant between Creator and creation. The earth had been washed, and with it the memory of rebellion, but man's heart, though spared, still carried the seed of choice. The voice that spoke to me said, "The waters cleanse, but the heart must choose." For even in the perfection of new beginnings, the potential for corruption remains. I saw Noah's face as he stepped onto the new earth. The ground was soft beneath his feet, the air clean and filled with the scent of renewal. He knelt and kissed the soil, tears falling like morning dew. Around him his family wept in awe. The sky shone with a color unseen before, neither gold nor silver, but the hue of divine forgiveness. Then light arched across the heavens, forming the first rainbow. It was not decoration, it was covenant. The voice spoke again, calm and final. "Never again by water, but remember, fire awaits those who forget." I stood within the silence of the aftermath and felt the weight of eternity settle over the earth. The flood had passed, but its message remained written upon every stone, every leaf, every breath. Creation had learned what it means to be cleansed, and heaven had shown that justice and mercy are not enemies but reflections of the same divine law. And as I beheld that new world, the Spirit whispered through me, "So it shall always be. What is born of rebellion will drown in consequence, but what is born of obedience will float upon the waters carried by the hand of God himself." When the waters withdrew, silence clothed the world like a garment of light. I stood in vision upon the cleansed earth, and the air itself seemed reborn. The soil breathed again, soft as a child's skin, untouched by the memory of blood. The sky had changed its hue. It was no longer the mirror of wrath, but the canopy of forgiveness. And I felt the pulse of creation steady, as though the heart of the world had remembered its maker. The mountains glistened like altars newly consecrated. The rivers, once red with ruin, now shimmered like veins of living glass. Even the wind sang not with words, but with understanding. All that had fallen into darkness was now bathed in mercy's dawn. I saw Noah kneel upon the damp ground, his head bowed, his tears mingling with the earth's dew. He built an altar, not of pride, but of remembrance. The smoke that rose was pure, carrying gratitude instead of fear, and heaven received it. I heard the voice that spoke to him also speak within me. This is not an ending, it is a return. Creation begins again where obedience stands. Those words lingered like fire written upon the spirit, for the flood had not only cleansed the world, it had unsealed truth long hidden beneath the noise of men. In the stillness that followed, revelation moved through me like light through clear water. I saw that judgment is never cruel, for cruelty has no place in eternity. Judgment is alignment, the bringing of creation back into the rhythm of its source. The waters had not destroyed. They had tuned the instrument of life to the tone of heaven once more. I understood then that every soul, every world, every age must face its flood, not of water, but of consequence. And only those who anchor themselves in faith, as Noah anchored his ark, shall remain above the waves. I beheld the rainbow once more, arched across the heavens like a bridge between the visible and the unseen. It was more than light refracted. It was promise embodied. Each color whispered of balance, wrath and mercy, justice and compassion, beginning and remembrance. I felt within me the echo of God's sigh, not of exhaustion, but of completion. Never again by water, he said. And yet I sensed that the greater flood of spirit, of revelation, of awakening was yet to come. The watchers remained bound, their voices sealed within the caverns of judgment. The Nephilim were no more, their strength dissolved into dust. Yet their story lingered, carved into the memory of mankind as warning and reflection. For the battle between light and desire still lives within the heart of man. The same longing that pulled angels from heaven still whispers within every soul to reach for forbidden light, to taste knowledge untempered by humility. But wisdom is not what is known, it is what is obeyed. As I gazed upon the new dawn, I felt the Spirit say, the fall of angels was the mirror of man's own potential. Every age will replay their choice until humility reigns again. I knew then that redemption is not the erasure of sin, but the remembrance of order. The watchers fell for love misdirected, for beauty unguarded, for freedom without reverence, and so will humanity fall whenever it forgets that freedom without obedience is bondage in disguise. I felt peace move through the vision, deep and endless. The world had returned to stillness, yet it was not the stillness of death, it was the stillness of awakening. The divine breath hovered once more over the waters of consciousness, whispering creation into being again. I saw the first light of a new age, gentle and patient, reaching across the earth like the hand of God touching his own reflection. Then the voice spoke within me, quiet as eternity. Write this, for remembrance is salvation. When men forget what the flood was for, they will build towers of pride again. But even then, my mercy will not fail them, for I am the beginning and the return. And I understood that the flood was not a story of destruction, but a prophecy of renewal, that every soul must face its own deluge, must let the waters wash away the idols it has built, must rise again upon the ark of faith toward the mountain of light. For creation, once redeemed, never ends. It simply awakens, again and again, until it remembers the hand that made it.